It's my very great pleasure and privilege to introduce our distinguished keynote speaker, Rod Blytho, who is going to be giving his keynote speech in a moment. He's also giving a Q&A session later in the day, and he's also going to be involved in the stimulating debate, which is going to round off the day. Now, some people light up a room when they enter it. Some people light up a room when they leave it. Rod is definitely one of those people who lights up a room when he enters it, and he's been lighting up rooms and enlightening minds for a very long time. In fact, if you have a look at his biodata, you will see that it seems impossible, but he first came to India in 1986. He seems far too young for that to be true, but he assures me it's correct. And he's been coming back for various projects ever since, as well as traveling to other parts of the world. And at the moment, he's working on long-term projects in Uzbekistan and Ukraine, as well as co-authoring and co-editing a number of books, including a book on CPD, which he has co-edited with Amol Padwad for the British Council India. On perhaps a more personal note, Rod has also told me that he enjoys reading, cooking, and walking, but not necessarily all at the same time, and that he is a staunch supporter of Liverpool Football Club. And I would like to have said, obviously, a quality club, but after yesterday's result, I'm not so sure. But anyway, could we give Mr. Rod Blytho a very warm Tech 15 welcome? Rod Blytho.
So this one is forward. Back. Okay. Good morning, everybody. I wonder if you can hear me. Is it okay now? Yeah. Good morning, everybody. And a big thank you to George just now for introducing me. I'm in mourning because Liverpool were beaten in Turkey last night. So I don't know about lighting up the room. I don't feel like lighting up anything when my team loses. I'd like to say a big thank you to the British Council for inviting me. It's an honor and a privilege to be asked to give the keynote address to such a distinguished conference. Thank you very much. My own perspectives on quality are many and varied. I've been at the sharp end of quality for the last 25 to 30 years, teaching on teacher education courses, master's programs, working on various quality committees, and also functioning as an external examiner to a number of different institutions. Quality is a hard concept to define, and I'm still not sure what it means. And that's why I'm up here. I'm up here to explore with you what quality means. And in my talk today, I want to bring in some personal perspectives, some international perspectives, and finally, I'll be leaving you with some ideas and some questions which I hope you'll consider during the conference. A brief overview of where I'm going to take you in the next 45 minutes or so. Let's see first if we can look at the notion of quality in initial teacher education, where most work has been done in quality issues. What do we expect of teachers of English? The initial speakers from the platform kept mentioning globalization, mobility, expectations of 21st century English teachers, and even, God help us, 22nd century teachers of English. But we need also to look at this from the point of view of CPD, not only from the point of view of initial teacher education. And it's a more difficult dimension where quality is concerned, as I hope to point out. I want to look at some of the factors which are pushing quality right now. Dr. Singh mentioned how high it is on our agenda at the moment, what a priority quality is. I think it's worth understanding just why that's the case. But there are also what I've called drag factors, factors which make quality rather a more difficult thing to implement once we understand what it means. And then I want to just take a look a little bit under the surface of some of the jargon and some of the terminology which accompanies quality, to look at some of what I've called the real ingredients of quality. Some evidence from overseas contexts, because I think in this globalized world, we ought to be looking way beyond national boundaries in order to understand education and educational concepts. And then finally, for you, some questions to address. Let's look first at quality in initial teacher education, some perspectives. And first of all, the internal provider perspectives. And before I go into detail on this, I'm going to ask you to accompany me through a very short task, just to engage you a little bit. Initial teacher education, quality in initial teacher education, what does it mean for you? Could you brainstorm 2 or 3 concepts which you associate with quality and keep them in your minds? I'd just like you to talk to each other for no more than 2 minutes, and I'll interrupt you using this microphone. It's a privilege to have it. But 2 minutes, what do you associate with quality in initial teacher education? What are the concepts that you associate with quality? Could you please discuss? Discuss means talk to your partner. So 2 or 3 brainstormed ideas to associate with quality. I've got my eye on you, so get talking. Okay, have you got some ideas? I hope you have. It's impossible to take a lot of feedback in such a big audience, but what I wanted to do was just to get you thinking about your own notions of quality, because what you bring to this idea is as important as what the literature tells us about quality. Everybody needs a notion of quality in what they do, and these associations which you've been thinking about will probably help you to make sense of the jumble of words that I'm going to attack you with in a moment. As providers of initial teacher education, the colleges and universities that are offering courses in initial teacher education have their own perceptions of quality. This is an insider perception. This is a perception of quality which resides within an institution. It's what makes an institution like EFLU, for example, able to make claims that they make about being the leading foreign language institution, for example, in India. Justifiable claims. And this kind of perspective on quality has to do with internal self-monitoring. It has to do with the way in which an institution self-evaluates and the mechanisms that they put in place in order to ensure that the courses that they offer are of the right quality. There's a second perspective, which I always call a stakeholder perspective. Stakeholders in initial teacher education are many and varied, but they do include the students, they include the schools and the employers of future teachers. But I'd like to even extend that notion of stakeholders by referring to the children of the schools in which the teachers are going to be teaching. These are also, as you'll see in a moment, legitimate stakeholders in the issue of quality. There's a kind of chain, if you like, a food chain, which exists in the area of quality. Quality teacher education will produce quality teachers. Quality teachers will provide quality instruction to their students in schools, and you will have quality learning outcomes from all the little children who are in English classes throughout the world as a result of this. So stakeholder perspectives include children, their parents, the views, if you like, of everybody who has a legitimate interest in educational quality. Take it one stage further, and it even includes the employers of the children when they graduate from school and university with good English. So just a stakeholder kind of perspective. External compliance and control perspectives, this is the quality assurance industry, which Dr. Singh referred to, which has been growing as a, if you like, almost an offshoot industry, a byproduct industry of education for the last 20, 30 years. In Britain, we have an authority called the QAA, the Quality Assurance Agency, which looks after quality in higher education, and Ofsted has now taken, the Office for Standards in Education, has now taken over the role of quality control in initial teacher education. These perspectives, these external compliance perspectives, are very often imposed at national level. And it's interesting that in India, the NAAC in Bangalore has been responsible for HE quality perspectives beyond teacher education, but also including teacher education. There is a problem attached to the way in which compliance is checked, and I'll return to that. It's often a paper exercise, and one which involves a lot of box ticking, but we'll talk about that a little bit more later. some of this work, and there is a reference. Did you receive a handout, or are the handouts ready? Have you had a handout? Not yet. Okay. Yeah, I will need the team to produce the handouts. Has somebody from the British Council got handouts ready? Can I have somebody waving to me? Yeah, okay, somebody's checking. That's great. You should get a handout to take away at the end of the session. Each of these perspectives of quality has a strong element of accountability. Accountability within an institution, accountability by teachers to themselves, accountability to stakeholders, and accountability to government and national agencies of different sorts. Just to emphasize what this issue of quality is really all about, I couldn't resist this. I'll just let you take it in. Can you read it? There are some wicked cartoons available, but this one seems to encapsulate the perspective of those absolutely vital stakeholders, the children, and the way that they see teacher education is encapsulated quite nicely in this rather mischievous cartoon. So, hope you enjoyed. So, let's just go beyond those three perspectives and look at some slightly different areas of focus in teacher education. And I want to mention here that partnership is probably top of the list in all sorts of ways. We've heard Chris and several of the other platform speakers talking about the role that the British Council has played in partnership in developing quality here in India, and it's been an important role. But the really key role in partnership in initial teacher education is actually concerned with partnership with schools. The schools where the young teachers, the teachers-to-be, go into for their teaching practice to gain experience, and where they go for the first years of their service. And that partnership needs to be a strong one based on mutual trust and based on an understanding of what teacher education and teacher supply really means. There is, of course, a huge emphasis on quality in initial teacher education because it's a must. Teachers retire, teachers leave the service, and the government has to guarantee teacher supply. And all of this depends on strong partnership between the providers, the teacher education institutions, and the schools. I've had the privilege of working in Uzbekistan and in Ukraine on curriculum issues. And these curriculum issues are at the heart of quality in initial teacher education as well. Is the curriculum fit for purpose? The model in post-Soviet countries of teacher education has been based on an understanding of philology as a concept. Philology as the science of, the academic science of studying languages. And this has meant that subject knowledge has been defined as knowledge about language rather than knowledge of language. And one of the problems we had to address in the curriculum balance was that we had young teachers-to-be who knew everything about English grammar, who knew everything about English literature. Am I ringing a bell here? Who knew everything possible about Shakespeare's sonnets, but who couldn't speak English and who couldn't order a breakfast in an English cafe if they once got there. And one of the reasons for this was that the prospects of travel beyond the boundaries of the republics in which they work were so limited that English was never seen as a means of communication. It was seen as an academic discipline. And the academic disciplines of literature and linguistics dominated over the basic need for a working communicative knowledge of the language which these young people were going to teach. So when we talk about subject knowledge, we're not just talking about knowledge about language, we're talking about proficiency in language. And that's an absolutely key element of quality in initial teacher education. It's no good being able to quote Shakespeare if you can't communicate on a basic level in English. So subject knowledge needs to be located, understood, and woven into a pre-service training curriculum, an initial teacher education curriculum. This is a huge issue also in India, and I'm aware of this, but I'm going to let other speakers tackle the situation in India more directly because I don't live and work here. The status of teaching as a profession is also a big issue in a lot of countries. And if teaching is seen as a low-status profession, the impetus for quality in teacher education and later in teaching is much lower than it should be. The whole question of gatekeeping at entry into initial teacher education and the exit points of initial teacher education is a quality issue. Because if teaching is a third, fourth, fifth, or sixth choice for young people, not a first choice, it means that you are not getting the best young recruits to the teaching profession. In many cases, I'm in teaching because I couldn't get into medicine or I couldn't get into law, for example. And teaching becomes a fallback position. Until we up the status of teaching as a profession and until we set very clear entry standards for the teaching profession, we will not improve the quality of delivery which we need both in teacher education and in the schools. And then the exit points, and this is a very vexed issue. Working in Ukraine, I found out that nobody ever fails. Nobody ever fails to pass the final examinations, the final assessments. Everybody who enters and sticks through the course becomes a teacher. And again, that affects the quality of the teachers in schools, and it's something that we need to look at. I'm not sure what the situation is here in India, but if you have a no-fail situation, the danger is that you will get inadequate teachers in schools. There is an understandable concern now with what has come to be called accessible outcomes in initial teacher education. We should know, and Dr. Singh said it's a journey, we should know where the journey is leading and what the results of that journey are going to be. And it's important that these results are assessed so that we have genuine evidence that the young people graduating from universities have achieved the desired outcomes in teacher education. That, in its turn, requires real work on assessment tools. And the assessment tools have to be the right ones for assessing teacher education. There's also the issue of differentiation between providers, which is not only an issue here in India, but in a number of different countries. The private sector is involved in the education of teachers, as well as the public sector. there are levels of teaching and therefore levels of providers. So teachers of primary school level are educated in a different context from teachers going into secondary schools. And the differentiation between providers, in turn, makes it more complex to come up with quality standards. And finally, an understandable concern with management practices in higher education institutions, HEIs. HEIs are managed in so many different ways, many of them idiosyncratic, and the impact of good or bad management styles on the quality of teacher education is immense. And I've seen evidence of that in almost every institution that I've worked with internationally and in the UK. So what about these outcomes? What about these results? Where are we going with all of this? Well, 21st century teachers, the governor talked about. Who are these people? Well, there's a selection of obviously 21st century teachers because they are a mixed bunch, with some with ties, some without ties, some with a pullover, some without a pullover, some looking, and so on. 21st century teachers. And what is it that they're going to have to address? I was very interested in the governor's remarks about mother tongue and the relationship between mother tongue and English. And just to digress slightly for a moment, I think there is a lot of evidence in the globalized world now that we're looking at English not so much as a foreign language in many contexts, but as an element of basic literacy. That the status of English as an essential curriculum component at school level is tantamount to literacy in the mother tongue. And that if we aspire to really equipping our young people with English as a working language, a language which means something in communicative terms, then it will be important for us to see English and literacy in English as a basic rather than an add-on. And I think that's an orientation which is growing in many different contexts around the world. Here in India, where English is one of the national languages, I think it's a point for you to ponder on. So English is an element of basic literacy. Coupled with that, the change that seems to be taking place again in a globalized world of the English classroom as a window on a wider world. It's true to say, and I'm sure many of you will be aware of this, that English is a channel, a conduit for ideas from other cultures, from Western cultures, from other cultures where English is spoken. Excuse me. And the role of the English class is far more than just a language class. It's about opening young people's eyes to what's going on beyond their villages, beyond their towns, beyond their immediate contexts. The possibilities for English teachers to be educators and not just teachers of language are immense. And this is also a quality issue. I'll come back to that a little bit more in the next point, because every curriculum, every school curriculum around the world these days seems to emphasize the importance of transferable skills, cross-curricular dimensions, things like critical thinking skills, things like teamwork skills, time management skills, ICT skills, all of these soft skills and transferable skills which appear as curriculum objectives, but because they are cross-curricular in nature, they become everybody's business and nobody's. And the result of that is that people who are constrained by their view of English as a school subject will say, for example, I teach English. It's not my business to teach ICT. It's not my business to teach critical thinking skills. It's not my business to teach teamwork skills. My job is to impart the English language to my students. And once I've done that, I've done my job. Well, I would like to put it to you that the 21st century English teacher will need to do much more than that. The 21st century English teacher will need to take responsibility for these cross-curricular dimensions. And think for a moment about the impact on initial teacher education of such a move. So it takes critically thinking teacher educators to produce critically thinking teachers. So if the teacher educators are not promoting critical thinking and leading by example, then there wouldn't be any critical thinking going on in the teachers' minds, and the teachers wouldn't be able to promote critical thinking among their students. Now, we're into a methodological question here, which I don't want to go into too deeply, but this, for me, is part of what quality will be meaning in the 21st century as we move ahead. The need to meet international standards, it's absolutely clear in teachers' own language and in the language of their students. It's important to take international standards into account. India is not yet, as I understand it, taking part in PISA assessments, although OECD is working with India on assessing literacy and numeracy through the PISA scheme. And again, international standards come into play there. The 21st century English teacher is going to need to understand that learning doesn't only take place in the classroom, learning takes place now, thanks to the internet and globalization. Learning takes place beyond the boundaries of the classroom. And it's no longer possible for the English teacher to set the limits of what learners learn, because learners will be learning outside the classroom. And one of the things that 21st century English teachers will have to do is to help learners to make good decisions about where they go in the internet, for example, to improve their English. That's going to be a teacher responsibility, the facilitation of learning, the facilitation of learning opportunities for their students. So teachers are going to have to think outside the box as well as inside the box if the box is their classroom. And in order to do that, they themselves will have to be explorers of learning opportunities, and they themselves will have to be language learners who lead by example. So it's no longer enough for the teacher to be in total control of the syllabus and for the teacher to be the sole source of English. Let's look now a little bit at the CPD dimension. In many ways, CPD is the poor relation compared with initial teacher education because it's largely unregulated, it's poorly funded in many contexts, and it's more difficult to embrace CPD as a notion. We've transcended the point where CPD was seen solely as in-service training, and we understand that CPD is a multi-dimensional enterprise for each individual teacher. But it still needs opportunity, it still needs funding. And one of the difficulties we've found here in India and also in my other work elsewhere is being able to make the case for quality opportunities for teachers to develop professionally in the face, very often, of management styles which simply want to keep control of what's going on. Because a lot of CPD work is bottom-up in nature and threatens to slip out of the control of those who would like to manage it more effectively. There are no clear quality indicators and quality measures for CPD. Mentoring for novice teachers is a huge area which needs to be tackled. The attrition rates in many different countries, and by attrition rates I mean those leaving the profession, are huge. And I've got some statistics somewhere which I would like to quote to you. I'll come back to this in a couple of minutes and give you some chapter and verse on this, but it's startling. The number of young teachers who leave the profession within the first few years of service for various reasons. And mentoring, and a good mentoring scheme, can do so much to support young teachers as they develop. Provision and opportunities for CPD are hugely varied across sectors, across contexts, and it's unfortunately the case that even within institutions, attitudes to CPD vary so much. Now, the British Council, Equals, which is a European Association of Language Schools, Cambridge exams, and the European Profiling Grid, the Council of Europe, have all done work on producing a framework for a teacher to track their progress through their careers. And these frameworks are associated with stages in a teacher's professional life and also with qualifications which teachers can attain. I'm going to say a little bit more about grids in a few moments, but I understand that work is well advanced in India on a parallel framework which is context-specific for India. These grids are a support to teachers in tracing their own professional development across their careers. And I'm sure the British Council people would be happy to make their own framework available. Maybe in some of the sessions it will be talked about. And finally, the qualifications ladder and where it leads. And I just want to refer to this very, very briefly. The qualifications ladder very often ends up with taking the best teachers out of the classroom. And if we want quality in our classrooms, we want the best teachers to stay in classrooms, not to be attracted into administration. I can say a few words about this because I've spent quite a bit of time myself in administration. And I've been conscious of the effect that being in administration has on my own well-being and my own feelings as a professional teacher. I love teaching, I enjoy teaching. Teaching matters to me. And actually, your career sometimes comes full circle. I've now abandoned administration completely, and I'm back to doing what I enjoy doing best, which is working with teachers and with trainers. So I think we've got to beware of qualifications which take teachers out of what they should be doing best and attach higher prestige to administrative posts and lower prestige to teaching posts, which seems to me to be a disastrous view of the world, potentially disastrous. So why is quality now such a big issue? George, how am I doing for time? Okay, thanks. Yeah, it just gives me a little bit to bite onto. Thanks a lot. Why are we prioritizing quality now? These are what I've called the push factors. Do you like the bulldozer? These push factors, some people have already mentioned them. The pace of internationalization and globalization. No country wants to be left behind in quality terms. It's absolutely obvious that India, for example, now as a global player, is looking over its shoulder at what's going on in other countries and saying what they can do, we can do just as well. And that's really important in quality terms. The challenge here, of course, is huge, and I'll come back to that in a moment or two. So the pace of internationalization, globalization, and change, everything seems to be moving forward so fast. And do you sometimes feel that you have to run just in order to stand still? I have that feeling sometimes. Everything's changing so fast. People are talking about things that 5 years ago they were not talking about, and suddenly they're all the rage. All of a sudden, we're talking about flipped classrooms. Flipped classrooms? The idea of flipping a classroom was difficult for me at first, until I understood the notion that it was a methodological thing that people were talking about. People are talking about MOOCs. Can you put your hand up if you know what a MOOC is? Oh, good, good, good. So there are quite a few people here who are already on board with a MOOC. A massive online, can somebody help me? Opportunity. Massive. Yeah, okay. If you don't know what MOOC means, you can talk to any of George and the British Council people here afterwards. I couldn't quite hear what they were telling me, but MOOCs, these new ideas are pouring in, but each one of the new ideas needs to stand the test of quality. There is always the danger that people jump on bandwagons and say, if it's new, it must be good. So we got, for example, multiple intelligences a few years ago. And at the very first tech conference 5 years ago, there were lots of presentations on multiple intelligences. Since then, research has been done on multiple intelligences, and it's beginning to be questioned as a concept. People are not so sure that multiple intelligence theory can actually be put into practice in real terms in the classroom. In other words, the quality tests for new ideas like multiple intelligences need to take place at the chalk face in the classroom before they become part and parcel of what's propounded on teacher education courses. So it's really important for this kind of thing to be taken into account. Of course, India is looking at standards elsewhere, and it's quite important that they should be. And this is where PISA, OECD, and so on are useful. There is a huge need to share good practice. And conferences like this give us a fantastic opportunity to put our heads together and actually share our ideas. There is also the belief among teachers that their future careers may not be circumscribed by national boundaries anymore. And there is a much more mobile teaching profession than there used to be. Here in India, this has both a positive and a negative side. Opportunities to teach elsewhere and maybe to come back to India later with more experience, with ideas to share, and so on. But also, I've mentioned here the lure of the Gulf. When I was in Dubai a couple of years ago, I was astounded to find just how many Indian teachers of English were operating there. Very, very large numbers. A significant part of the workforce, and not only in Dubai, in other Gulf countries and in Saudi Arabia too. There are obvious reasons for this, and like I say, there's a downside. But if these teachers do come back to India, they'll come back richer, more experienced, richer financially as well, more experienced, and also probably better able to give a rounded education to the young people they work with. I mentioned just before the issue of teacher shortages and attrition rates, and this is a real push factor. Just a couple of quotations here for you from other contexts. In the USA, 15% plus, it can be 16 or 70% of teachers leave the workforce annually, 15, 16, or 17%. You may say that's normal, that's about a normal rate, but in Australia, almost 50% of teachers leave the profession within the first 5 years. I don't have any figures for India. I know that in some areas of the UK, particularly in urban areas, the rate is 40% within the first 5 years. Now, this is a huge push factor. We really need quality in teacher education, in mentoring, in order to prevent this attrition. The investment of the state in initial teacher education is massive. And if teachers are dropping out like flies, everything is lost. All that investment is lost. And then, of course, the changing English language. Everything else is changing, and English, of course, is changing all the time. And another push factor is the need for teachers to be able to keep up with the changes in the English language. What about the drag factors? And I'll refer to these relatively briefly, just to speed through them. Things which are getting in the way of quality. Quantity and scale, it's a huge issue in India. It's very difficult to monitor quality nationally, given the federal nation of the Indian state and the huge numbers that are involved. Quantity and scale. I know that there's a discussion on this issue of quality and quantity either later today or tomorrow, and they'll go into it in more detail. Tradition and vested interest in the status quo in teacher education institutions. People sitting on jobs in discipline areas and behaving territorially and saying, I've always taught phonology in this way and I'm going to teach phonology in this way. I've always taught Shakespeare's sonnets in this way. I don't know why I've got it in for Shakespeare's sonnets today, but I'm going to continue to teach Shakespeare's sonnets in this way. And these people have tenure, these people sit on jobs, these people are senior, and you can't budge them. And you would like to make room in the curriculum for more pedagogical work in the curriculum, but you can't budge them because they've been sitting on these jobs since time immemorial. Some of the faculty in teacher education institutions, and I'm not talking only about India, some of the faculty are a bit like Jurassic Park. Status and salary issues, it is still not an attractive profession, and the press is still full of teacher bashing. You can pick up any daily newspaper in India, and once a week you're sure to find letters in the correspondence page attacking teachers, because everybody knows better than teachers do about education. Everybody is an expert in education. Everybody feels the right to challenge what teachers do in the classroom. What a terrible impact that has on self-esteem and on quality. Lack of skilled and qualified teacher educators. There is still a shortage. The British Council is addressing it here in India, but nobody trains the teacher educators. Teacher educators generally slip into that role almost by accident or by seniority, but nobody trains them in teacher education in the principles and the rationale underlying teacher education. And the result, of course, is that there is such a wide variety of practices in teacher education. That's been addressed in the private sector. It hasn't been addressed in the public sector. Variations in assessment practices, lack of funding and genuine commitment at governmental level in so many countries not investing in education, and the bureaucratization of quality assurance processes, putting everything onto paper, turning quality assurance into a paper exercise. And very often, poor communication between authorities and teachers. I'm sorry to rush this bit a little bit, but I just wanted to give you a couple of warnings, things to beware of. I do get a bit tired of statistics about the scope and scale of training interventions. And sorry, British Council people, but it's one of the things that the British Council is doing a lot in public presentations. They're very often saying things like 340,000 teachers trained, blah, blah, blah. We know nothing about the quality of that training. We know nothing about the penetration of that training. We know nothing about the duration of that training. So those statistics by themselves always need to be questioned. And because they need to be questioned, I think they should be put out there for closer scrutiny, and quality measures should be invoked as well as quantitative measures. Look out for unsubstantiated statements about breadth, reach, and impact of training, especially CPD, especially in-service training. Abuses by managers of CPD frameworks, those frameworks that I introduced to you, the British Council framework and so on. The people who came up with the Common European Framework of Reference for Modern Languages complain now about the abuses of the framework, and every framework is subject to abuse if it's misunderstood and misinterpreted. So something to look out for the frameworks that are being developed. The evaluations of quality which are based solely on paper evidence and box ticking. Real quality in teacher education takes place in the interaction between teachers and their trainers. And watch out for people making a career out of quality assurance. It's a parasitical industry. It's not an end in itself. But there are people making a career out of quality assurance, and we have to watch out that they don't call all the shots, because if they were calling all the shots, they would need more mechanisms than they have at the moment in order to understand what quality means. So what are the underlying ingredients of quality that I referred to in the title of my talk? Well, these underlying ingredients include, among other things, congruence and coherence between values and beliefs on the one hand and ways in which a program is actually delivered. Every teacher education program needs a set of principles, a set of beliefs, a set of values, a vision which underpins it. And the delivery of that program has to be coherent with the values, with the vision, and with the rationale which underpins the program. Can you say that in your institution? So much depends on the quality of relationships. It's absolutely central to success in teaching and in training in teacher education. The relationships between teacher educators and students, the relationships between everybody within an institution, absolutely central. Empathy. It's no good being a teacher educator, and you can't develop quality in teacher education if you don't remember what it's like to be in the shoes of your first-year students or of the teachers that you're working with. You have to be able to start where they are and not where you are. It's no good standing and lecturing at them, because when you stand and lecture at your students in a teacher education course, you're not listening to them. You're telling them where you are, but you're not understanding where they are. And to understand where they are, you need interaction in teacher education. And for me, interaction is at the core of good teacher education. Every teacher educator needs to be responsive, reflective, creative, flexible. There are no one-size-fits-all solutions to teacher education. And beware of quality indicators that actually stipulate exactly what should be done. Self-esteem and teacher well-being. Teachers need to feel good about what they're doing. They don't need to be bullied and bashed all the time. And the nature of partnerships, as I've said, between higher education institutions and schools. Very quickly, some evidence from overseas, and then I'm rounding off. Finland. And you might say, Finland, small country, rich country, high standards and all the rest of it. But Finland is right at the top of all international measures in teacher education, in education generally, and so on. And one of the reasons why that's the case is because teaching is seen as a highly respected and well-paid profession, and teacher education is an absolute national priority. There's a source for all of this, which I'll give you at the end. Singapore has a career, again, small, nothing like the scale of India, has a career ladder that recognizes good practice and keeps excellent teachers in the classroom where they are needed. The incentives to stay in the classroom are greater than the incentives to leave the classroom. Canada, financial support for teachers in training. So teachers are paid while they are trained. They're actually paid while they are trained. And again, this is maybe beyond the reach of a country which is poorer, but it gives you an idea of the kinds of practices which we need to aspire to and move towards if we're going to work towards real quality. There's a study by Darling Hammond and Lieberman mentioned in the bibliography where you can find more evidence from overseas. It's an excellent book and I commend it to you. So I'm going to leave you with some questions. There are questions for you as providers. Can we have the handouts, please, everybody? Are the handouts here? Okay, so the handouts are to be available on the British Council stand afterwards, and these questions are on your handouts. They are questions for you to think about during the conference. If you are a provider, there's a set of questions, and every one of these questions is there. So I'm not going to read them now. I'm going to let you go to the handouts and keep them in your hands and address these questions in your discussions. And some questions for teachers, teacher educators, and trainers. Again, questions which address the under-the-surface issues of quality. What I have tried to do in this presentation is to set a bug going amongst you, and this is the quality bug. This bug I would like you to keep in mind right through the conference. This bug is intended to infect you with questions and thoughts about quality. And what I've tried to do is to stress that quality is far more than just the sum of a lot of indicators, the sum of a lot of boxes that are ticked, the sum of a lot of individual and isolated views of what goes on. Quality needs to be seen as a holistic concept. It needs to be seen in our teacher education terms as the whole experience of being educated as a teacher. So I'd like to leave you with that thought and to thank you very much for your attention. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Rod. Thank you. Rod said that the best teacher educators are creative, responsive, and flexible, and I'd like to thank you for exemplifying those qualities. Alexander Tremford said, the best teachers are those who show you where to look, but don't tell you what to see. And I think that's exactly what Rod has done. He's shown us where to look, but he hasn't told us what to find there. And thank you very much for your stimulating questions, which I'm sure will resonate with all of us throughout the conference. So what I'd like to do is just to give Rod a small token of our appreciation of what he's already done for this conference. and also what he's going to do later on for this conference. And if you'd like to accept this small token, it would be my honor to give it to you. Okay. And if you could just wait for one brief moment. I just have one or two very short announcements to make. Firstly, with regards Rod, as I said earlier on, his handout will be on the British Council stall in the exhibition hall after this session. And secondly, another little hiccup here, a Q&Q, which suggests that it's questions and questions, and presumably there's an A in there as well. There's been a Q&Q and some A's for answer session with Rod in room 105 at 2 o'clock. And I'd also like to draw your attention to your conference program. Have you all seen your conference program? And we've tried to keep it as simple as possible, but I just want to point out to you that in different parts of the program, you get different versions of the program. At the beginning of the program, you get an overview, and then if you look at pages 19 to 25, you can see a detail of the parallel sessions that are going to take place after the break. And finally, if you look at the back of your program, you will see that there is the whole program in a day. And if you get very tired during the conference and decide that you just don't have the strength to carry the whole program with you, you can just tear out that page, okay? So we've tried to think of everything when it comes to your comforts. And the thing I would like to emphasize is that your program looks remarkably similar to everybody else's program. So if you want to keep hold of it, and sometimes people lose their programs, could you put your name on your program so that we can give it back to you should you lose it? Now, just got one or two more short announcements. Firstly, if you are one of the panelists or debaters, could you please come to this room at 1 o'clock for a brief meeting? In the parallel sessions taking place at 11:45 to 1300, we have a change of room. The parallel session called Creating a Better Classroom Environment Through Innovative Classroom Setups has moved from room 201 to the Granite Room, and there will be people and signs outside to show you how to get to the Granite Room. The simple explanation is you go out of this door and turn left. Slightly more complicated than that, but that's the most important thing to remember. There is a session at 12:30, which is also being co-presented by Dr. Kiran Chauhan. And this afternoon at 2 o'clock in the parallel sessions, there is another session you can see there, Using Songs to Teach English, which has also been moved from 201 to the Granite Room. And we would also like you to get involved with the social media around this conference. And I would like to mention and like to introduce very quickly Paul. Paul, would you like to come up very briefly? And Paul has come all the way to India from Spain, in fact, for this conference. And I thought it would be useful that Paul could explain what these symbols mean, because he obviously knows a lot more about them than I do. Over to you, Paul.
Thanks, George. I'm sure you all know what they mean anyway, but yeah, obviously Twitter and Facebook. So we've got the hashtag for Twitter, which is hashtag Tech15. So if you're on Twitter or you're on Facebook, then please do tweet and post your messages to promote the conference. And yeah, I mean, I guess that's probably it. Also, just to let you know, we're conducting interviews in the exhibition hall. So if you want to come along, you can watch some of the interviews. We might also come and speak to some of you, or try and get some of you to come and talk to us in the interview booth as well. Okay, so we'll be doing that for today, tomorrow, and Sunday, with a view to putting the interviews and the talks together with a summary of the talks and some questions for your own professional development on the Teaching English website. So if you're familiar with that website, then you can go there probably from tomorrow, and you'll see the interviews and some of the talks there, as well as on obviously on the British Council India pages as well. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Paul. Now, just that, so it's clear, Paul is not the conference stalker, okay? If he comes up with you and asks you questions, he's doing it because that's his job. Okay, thank you, Paul. Now, finally, there is a medical room, and if you catch any bug other than the quality bug, perhaps you might like to try the medical room. I just want to make a point also about personal belongings, that this is an open space, and we can't guarantee, the security of everyone's belongings. So I think one needs to keep hold of one's belongings. And finally, I don't know, is anybody interested in tea and coffee at the moment? Could I have a quick show of hands if anyone's interested? Just checking that everyone's awake. Okay. Finally, teas and coffees will now be available in the exhibition hall and the lunch hall. So just to keep it simple, you go out of the door, you turn right, and in the large halls there you will find teas and coffees. Okay. Thank you very much for your appreciation and understanding. See you later on. Thank you very much. The next session is at 11:45. Thank you.